are the top two centers in the league. Both are in the MVP convo. I think Embiid was winning it until this most recent injury where he hyperextended his, I think, left knee. Thank goodness it wasn't any structural damage or anything. He'll be able to play obviously in 2 to 3 weeks. But in any sense or just in general, do you think, or who do you think is better, Joel Embiid or Nikola Jokic?
Interesting. All right, so before I get into who I think, I got a hot take that I'm gonna hit you with off the bat.
Okay.
I was doing some looking up on the stat sheets of old centers, just like the best centers, because these guys really have been playing out of their mind good this year. Mm-hmm. So I was comparing them to center greats: Shaquille O'Neal, Hakeem Olajuwon, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. And my hot take is I think that Embiid and Jokic are the two best centers of all time. You heard it here first. It's a hot one. You can look it up. But I think with the modern NBA, like comparing with the modern NBA, with the three ball as a part of the game, because it wasn't part of the game back then. It's a very hot take, and I'm very curious if you have some comments. Definitely let me know in the comments. But when comparing just those two, Jokic or Embiid, I look at the one. I'll start with the biggest differential factor because they really are even in a lot of senses, and that goes with playmaking, passing, which I think Jokic is just one of the most special players to ever come by the league in that sense, with how tall he is, with how big he is, and how well he can pass. It is insane. So I'm going to give him the edge in that category off the bat, but do you have any other insight categories? What are your thoughts, huh?
Okay, so the way I look at this is it depends on your team. And in 85 to 90% of the situations, give me Jokic. Mainly just because I think his playmaking is more valuable than Embiid's defensive edge. And so if I had a team that was it was all role players, and I had to pick one, and the goal was how far can I get in the playoffs? I'd say give me Jokic. I think I'll get farther with him than Embiid. But if I had a loaded team, they had a bunch of stars like say Levine. There was Levine. There was Kyrie Irving, there was a bunch of other stars. In that sense, I would rather have Embiid because although I'm sacrificing the playmaking, I have these other guys that can do that. And he's more of a presence down low on the defensive end, and he is a complete anchor. And he is, I think, a notch or two above Jokic in that sense, in that you're not scoring on him easily in the post. He's 7'2", quick.
You're not making up room on him in the post. You try to back him down. You're going nowhere. You're going nowhere.
And the Sixers this year have been one of the best, I think, a top 3 or 5 defensive team. And they do have other good defenders like Thibault and Simmons, but a large part of that is because their inside defense is insane. And then here's the thing, too, with Jokic is his playoff performances have been out of this world. Do you think that has any factor on who's better?
I definitely do. You just said with any NBA debates, you got to talk about playoff performances, clutch performances. Jokic has proven just last year alone that he's one of the most clutch players in the league. And even, too, if you watch Nuggets games, the amount of Nuggets games I've seen come down to the last possession where Jokic just gets in the paint with a little, like, teardrop floater or even, like, a fadeaway, he really is one of the most clutch players in the NBA. And not to say Embiid's made some big shots, too, but when I think about Embiid and clutch, for some, the only thing I can think of is Kawhi hitting that 3 in his face. It was that way around, I think, for a reason. So I don't know. It's a tough scene, but that's what I would say in terms of clutchness. What are your thoughts, though, on clutchness? How does that play into the debate?
Yeah, I think it's huge because at the end of the games, one of these guys is going to have the ball in their hand. And would you rather have Jokic running a 2-man game with Murray or whoever? Because that's all the Nuggets do. And there's like 5 minutes left. It basically just goes into pick and roll with Jokic and usually Murray, but they're just running pick and roll nonstop, and then it could turn into a pick and pop. And Jokic gets the ball in the post. He can either pass it because he's really, really good at passing. His 3 is really good too. His fadeaway, he has insane touch from all around the court. I think better touch than Embiid, although Embiid's a pretty decent shooter. Mm-hmm. And then, around the rim, his finishing is really, really good too. So I like that. And that's the thing with Embiid, too, is in times of playoffs, your best ability is how often you can get on the floor. Embiid really struggles at playing a lot of games. He'll have injuries or be out of shape due to those injuries. I I think it was the Nets in 2019 where he missed a game or two just because of that. I mean, they still won, but if his team was not as good as they were or overpowering the Nets, like that's a huge issue. But Jokic is always there. He always brings his A game. 7-game series doesn't matter to him. He's going to play. He played 19 games last year, 2 7-game series. Came down from 2 3-1 deficits. Absolutely insane.
I would also say too with Jokic is in the playoffs too is he has another gear. He has like a third gear where in some of those big games he just came out like on a tear, going right into whoever's defender was, right to the hoop, and he would stay on that the entire game. Whereas Embiid definitely can do that himself too. But in terms of it's almost like a switch where I see a little bit more in Jokic compared to Embiid. And then another point that I was going to get to is when you look at how dominant these players are, a lot of times teams will throw the doubles in. And that's where I think a big factor where Jokic's passing comes into play, where he's so good at finding the open man off those. And Embiid is still pretty good at doing that, but not nearly to the extent, which is a big factor when you have a guy in the post who gets doubled a lot.
And Embiid in a one-on-one, I think he could be better. Just like if he's in the post and he has a one-on-one, like there's very few people that can guard his footwork and just his overall size. And in that sense, I think he probably is better than Jokic. Like Jokic is amazing around the rim, insane touch, but Embiid is just such a physical force that like staying in front of him is not easy. He'll get you in foul trouble and all that. So yeah, I think Jokic is better, but I think in certain situations where you do have a better roster and you can sacrifice a little playmaking for that defense, Embiid would be more suited. I was going to ask you too, do you think in a one-on-one situation, who do you think would win?
Yeah, so I was thinking about that, and I would give Embiid the upper hand. I think if it gets more physical, then he could just with his body and his size could make up a little bit more leverage and would be more of an anchor on defense. But I really think it'd go either way. I mean, it depends, obviously, if they're actually calling fouls, if it's street ball we're talking about, how the jumpers are going. Because I would say Embiid seems as good as Jokic is off the posts. He has like a little bit more variability with his moves, where I think Embiid has such a good grip on his like go-to moves that for a 1v1, I would probably pick Embiid. I think he'd be better suited for that.
Interesting. So I guess the question would be for me is like, I think Embiid's going to get his on Jokic, right? Like just due to size and stuff. But Jokic versus Embiid on Jokic on offense and Embiid on defense would be really interesting to watch. So I think Jokic is better just like movements in general with his offense. Embiid's obviously huge and has great footwork, but could he come out and guard him really well, like on the perimeter? Because Jokic can splash threes. That is not an issue for him. He could hit mid-range too. But I think the issue with Jokic is he benefits more from a team game just due to his passing, where as Embiid, he could just take the ball every time and go get you a bucket. Like that's not an issue. I still think I'd go Jokic though, just because of his shooting. Like three's more than two, and he can hit from deep when he gets hot, and he'll heat up. But
yeah, and then I would also just add on that if you're talking 1v1, I think just the other end of the spectrum will be in the pick and roll, and I think that's, as you said, part of the game where Jokic is just a little bit better. I think his game fits that style of play a little bit more.
Oh, yeah. I mean, watch any Nuggets game that's close in the last 5 minutes, and you'll see that's all they do. They just run pick and roll with him and Murray. Doesn't matter how many times in the possession, they'll just keep running it and spamming that. But it does work, and I'm interested to see, though, if Embiid didn't have Ben Simmons and there was more spacing, which there is more spacing this year, but it still is an issue with Simmons not really playing outside of or being able to score outside of 15 feet. Do you think that could maybe make Embiid look better if he had more room to operate with better shooters?
Yeah, I think that's a great point, actually. I think it definitely would make Embiid look a little bit better because that's one of the things I was bringing up earlier is when you bring the double, obviously he's going to pass it out, but if you got Simmons in the three, it's not really like, oh, is he going to bang a three? No, he's not going to bang a three. It's Ben Simmons. So I think that definitely hinders Embiid. And then I think it's just such a curious dynamic, though, because it's just literally transition versus more standstill. But I definitely think it decreases upon Embiid's true value on the court. What do you think, though, in that dynamic?
In the sense of
does it hinder Embiid's like how good like you think he would look better without?
Yeah, say he had like Kyle Lowry as his point guard. I think that would make him look a lot better in having more spacing. Simmons is a good passer, but there comes a time in the playoffs where him not being able to go outside of the paint and do much of anything is really a hindrance when you're in the half court. And I am excited to see Embiid because I think a lot of narratives could change if Embiid's healthy, the 76ers make a deep run like we're projecting them to do. And maybe against the Nets, they rattle off 2 or 3 games. And at that point, you could really make a stronger argument for Embiid in that he almost beat this loaded team with 3 studs and a ton of just other good players.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I think honestly, this debate is probably going to be ended in the playoffs. It's going to be we know Jokic has been clutch, but I mean, following up the act he did last year is a very tall task. So I think there is definitely room for Embiid to pull off a little run with the Sixers and prove kind of how he deserves to be on that same playing field, maybe even better.
Yeah, and then the MVP conversation too. I think Embiid, Jokic, and LeBron are the top 3 right now. With Embiid fell a little bit due to the injury, but if he's back and plays more than 70 games, he hasn't ever played more than 70 games, which is crazy, just due to injuries. That's what happens when you're 7'2" and 280.
It's true, and you're a physical man.
But that'll happen. And then, do you have any more thoughts on this before we wrap it up, Noel?
No. I think final decision. If it wasn't obvious, I would say Jokic is better. But I think Embiid has the chance to prove himself in the playoffs.
Yeah, he definitely does. I'll agree with that. And then that'll wrap it up for this episode, guys. Drop some comments on what you think of the Jokic.
Yeah, definitely let me know, too, if you think they're better centers. Roast me in the comments. Full on, if you want to. I embrace it.
Yeah, it's an interesting thought. I don't know. Hakeem, David Robinson, Patrick Ewing. We don't know about Wilt because the man played in the 50s, but yeah. That'll wrap it up.